Last but certainly not least, we have Fei Fong Wong, the main character. Why did I save the very first character you get in the game for last? I'm not quite sure myself. Anyway, let's get started. We'll begin talking about his capabilities on foot. Similar to Saiton as we talked about in the last episode, Fei's on-foot combat is pretty standard. After all, he's pretty much the baseline for it. He has respectable damage output considering he doesn't use weapons, and a strong agility of 11. He has access to all the normal death blows, but in addition to the 4 elemental ones that other characters get, he also learns Koke and Yamake, which are 2 exceptionally powered death blows of the light and dark elements respectively. Yamake has an especially insane power stat of 150, which is 3 times more powerful than Aerod's. Of course, these won't be usable until the very end of the game, so for most of the game he's just working with the standard stuff. If you're looking for good equipment, beyond a piece of armor, a pair of speed rings would be quite good on him, allowing him to get up to Saiton's speed. Alternatively, you could slot in the Power Crisis to up his damage output. It does also have minor synergy with Choo-Choo, but don't use Choo-Choo. Moving on to Fei's spell list, he has a lot of options in this regard. He starts with Guided Shot, a 20 power non-elemental ether attack. Fei is somewhat of a jack of all trades, and he's quite good at each role too. If you want to invest into Ether Fei, he's quite potent if you give him the right equipment. Ether Doubler and Ether Stones would be good for that sort of build, of course. Next, Fei gets Inner Healing, which is a solid single target healing spell, not much to say about it. After that, Fei learns Iron Valor, which is an infinite duration buff, and it grants him plus 25% attack. This is a solid spell and really boosts his damage output on the physical side. On the defensive side though, Fei learns Counter Force next. This grants Fei counter for 10 turns, the same as Bart gets. This is absolutely amazing when dealing with physical enemies, especially with the attack buff. It guarantees that he'll dodge all physical attacks and retaliate with an X attack for free. Following this, Fei learns Yin and Yang power, which are similar to Fei's Koga and Yamiga, but grant 20% instead of 10. They can also only target Fei, whereas Saiton's can target anyone. These spells are great to increase Fei's damage output even further, or to focus on defense. Since they increase or decrease either attack and ether, or defense and ether defense, the spell is very useful on Fei for his physical builds, ether builds, and tank builds. Moving on, Fei's next spell is Radiance, a strong 60 power single target ether attack. It's effectively an upgraded Guided Shot. Finally, Fei learns Big Bang. It's 80 power, hits all enemies, and on top of that removes all their buffs from them. This spell is absolutely amazing. Considering that Radiance and Big Bang are learned at level 55 and 72 respectively, Radiance will probably be your main damage output for Ether Fei during the Solaris arc, while Big Bang will be switched to after you get to the final dungeon. That's all for Fei's spell list, let's move on to talking about his gears. I'll be going in order of acquisition, so if you'd like to avoid spoilers, now's your time to click off the video. Fei starts with Veltal, which is an all-around solid gear. With an attack multiplier of 10 and a weight capacity of 840, it's quite good. Just like Fei on foot, Veltal can be set up for physical or ether damage output, though the ether build may not be quite as effective until you get to Akfi. Veltal doesn't get any special options, and for spells it's missing out on Counter Force and Iron Valor, meaning Guided Shot is your only real option until you get to level 46. Even if Veltal does miss out on Counter Force, it can still be an effective tank. If you get 3 magnetic coats, you can give a ton of extra evasion to Veltal. Each grants plus 25 response, which is amazing, especially in combination with Bart's Wild Smile or an evasion ring. Overall, Veltal's quite solid. Considering its good availability and the fact that Fei's required a lot of the time, he's definitely worth investing into and bringing along. Moving on to his next gear, Fei gets access to Veltal 2 at the very beginning of Disc 2. It's very similar to the original Veltal in terms of stats, but the major difference are its special options. For starters, it has System Id, which for 1000 fuel automatically triggers Hyper Mode. I'll talk more in depth about Hyper Mode later in this video, but overall I think this is Veltal 2's weakest option. Not to say it's bad, but not its strongest. Hyper Mode only lasts 3 turns, and System Id's version is the only one that doesn't work with the Holy Pendant, so... Anyway, moving on, his next option is Thor Wave, which is a single target non-elemental ether attack with 50 power. At 600 fuel, it's not super expensive. It's quite a solid option, if not outclassed by the next special option. Flaming Hell is another non-elemental ether attack, though this time it hits all enemies, costs 1000 fuel, and has a base power of 150. This is easily the best special option in the game. Veltal 2 is where Ether Fei really peaks. His ether options do far more damage than Ellie's Aerods with much lower investment. That's ignoring Veltal 2's better weight capacity too. With an extra 240 points over Ellie, he could equip 2 power magics and an ether circuit if he wanted to, but that would be overkill. He's free to invest into some defensive gear with the ether build just to top things off. Overall, Veltal 2 makes an incredible mage. That out of the way, we can move on to discussing Faye's final gear, the titular Xenogears. Xenogears is a lot more of a trade-off in comparison to the difference between Veltal and Veltal 2. Xenogears loses access to the special options entirely. In exchange, it gets a higher power multiplier of 12, which is the highest in the game. Additionally, it has a unique property which causes its hyper mode activation rate to be set at 99% 100% of the time. Again, we'll discuss hyper mode in a moment. While Xenogears losing access to Flaming Hell is unfortunate, by the point you get it, Faye should also have Big Bang. It is a downgrade of 150 power to 70 power, since the gear version is slightly weaker than the on-foot version, but his damage output is still more than respectable, especially with a couple of power magics as mentioned. Magic builds aside though, with a power multiplier of 12, Xenogears is a great damage dealer on the physical side as well. If you want to stop by the lighthouse and grab a GNRS or two, you can really increase his DPS. Xenogears' final build is the tank build. It is easily the best gear in the game for tanking. Normally, tanking in gear isn't very effective, since the most you can do is reduce damage, and healing costs a lot of fuel unless you're using Choo Choo, who's also pretty inefficient. However, thanks to a combination of phase spells and Xenogears' 99% hyper mode activation, you can actually become immortal. Immortality is actually quite easy to achieve with Xenogears. Before we get into that though, let's talk about what exactly hyper mode does. Hyper mode is a buff that lasts 3 turns. During it, you'll have access to 3 special death blows with higher power multipliers and lower fuel costs. Additionally, when you take the charge command, you'll restore 10 times the amount of fuel you normally would. Typically, this would be 300, but it also stacks with the charger accessories. With a Z charger, Xenogears could recover 5,000 fuel per charge in hyper mode. By utilizing a frame HP, you could easily recover the amount of fuel you need to repeatedly heal. Now, that said, hyper mode does typically have 2 downsides. The first is actually activating it. Normally, it's chance-based, and the chance increases as your HP decreases. You can also increase the chance by performing death blows. The higher the level, the higher the chance of increase, but that also means that you're not at attack level 3 as often, so it's a bit of a trade-off. Xenogears' innate 99% activation rate completely circumvents this issue, meaning we just need to reach attack level 3 at most, and it will almost always trigger. Reaching attack level 3 just requires we attack 3 times with X without using any death blows. Moving on, the other downside of hyper mode is its short duration. It only lasts 3 turns, but if the pilot is equipped with a holy pendant and you're not using system id, the duration is doubled to 6 turns. Technically anyone can use this strategy, but with what was mentioned before, Faye is the most consistent user of it. So, Xenogears specifically is the only gear who can completely circumvent hyper mode's biggest downsides at the cost of his pilot accessory, which is quite a small cost. This effectively means that in exchange for 3 turns of attacking without a death blow, you get 6 turns of hyper mode to charge fuel and dish out damage. Considering that frame HPs are each 240 weight and the Z charger is 600, you may want to go with an X charger instead. That'll give you 120 weight to work with, meaning you can fit an E circuit into the build. If you want to double down on defense instead, a Simp circuit would be a great pick. Simp circuits increase evasion while also preventing status effects. If you want better physical damage, you'll have to trade the X charger for an A charger to equip a GNRS. That said, A charger only makes your fuel recovered 500 in hyper mode. Seeing as X offers 2000 fuel, you may want to consider that when deciding which build to use. Of course, the Ether build can get away with things a little bit easier since the Ether Doubler is a pilot accessory and won't take up a slot in gear or weight. You do have to equip a Holy Pendant, and if you're late game you'll probably want Speed Shoes too, so you'll miss out on a little bit of extra Ether, but overall you really cannot go wrong with Immortality. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Faye. Early game, he's a strong jack of all trades with good availability, allowing you to build him however you'd like and specialize him. Later on, he'll gain access to strong unique effects, allowing him to outshine the rest of the party by endgame. Also, Faye is the final party member we have to cover. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm ending this series though. I have a couple of non-character guides I'd like to publish, so make sure to stick around for those. Subscribe to get notified for those, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.